guy has held a number of front office positions with the Buffalo Bills, the Carolina Panthers, the Colts, building up to his experience before getting his opportunity in 2013 to become a GM in the league. We're delighted to welcome the general manager of the Los Angeles Chargers, Tom Telesco. Tom, it's an honor to have you on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. This is a really interesting interview. Never done one like this before.
Thank you very much. And look, Tom, we ask everyone this, right? Like I think we sort of had a conversation off camera there, but have you any Irish heritage? Have you been to Ireland before? I believe you may have some heritage on your wife's side of your family.
Yeah, not on my side, but my wife's side. My wife, her maiden name is Connolly, so that one's pretty easy one to figure out, right? So, yeah, so she's Irish. She has not been to Ireland. I've not been to Ireland. I'm pretty sure her parents have. But yeah, that's to the extent of that. Although, and here's my other one, although really, so I grew up in Buffalo, and my dad is Italian, but he grew up in South Buffalo, and South Buffalo it pretty much is the same way. It's heavily Irish, very big Irish neighborhood in South Buffalo. My dad was the only Italian, I think, in the whole neighborhood. But that's the way he grew up there.
We've had the good fortune to have Jim Kelly on, and he has some great stories about the Irish in Buffalo. And
Yep.
But I think the Irish and the Italians, we've always gotten along, and we're delighted to welcome you. Tom, I suppose, look, reflecting on your time with the Colts, like 98, 2012, 154 wins, 12 playoff appearances, 8 division titles, 2 Super Bowl appearances, a victory over the Bears in Super Bowl 41. I mean, it's absolutely incredible ride there. How formative was your time there?
I mean, I'm so grateful and lucky for that experience. Yeah, so I had 3 years with the Carolina Panthers when Bill Polian was there, and then 15 years with the Colts. But really, everything I learned in scouting and building a roster, and really just how to be a general manager, which is, a big job. It's not just a scouting job. I learned from Bill Polian and his son, Chris Polian, really at the Colts over that 15-year span. And obviously having we had a Hall of Fame GM with Bill. We had a Hall of Fame coach with Tony Dungy. And then after Tony, we also had Jim Caldwell. And then obviously we had Peyton Manning and, Edgerrin James and Reggie Wayne and Marvin Harrison, Dwight Freeney. So a lot of great players. But yeah, I learned a lot. I mean, that's where I learned everything. So I was there initially as a college scout. So I had the Northeast area of the country, and then the Southeast, I believe. And then I got moved up to pro scouting, where I was scouting our opponents, the advanced scout of teams we're going to play, and then doing free agency reports and that sort of thing, and really enjoyed that part of the job. And then I was a director of pro scouting, and then director of player personnel, where I did more with the draft. And I had a chance to do a lot of work there and learn from some great people, and get a chance to learn from Bill really on a daily basis. I was lucky. I always tell the people here, sometimes it's just location. My office door was about, 10 feet from Bill's door, and about another 5 feet from his son, Chris Polian, who was the assistant general manager. Then he was the general manager when his dad was the president. So just a proximity. I mean, you're seeing what's going on a daily basis in the office and how things work, beyond scouting, as far as dealing with assistant coaches, dealing with head coaches, dealing with agents, dealing with the league office, contracts, salary cap. So I mean, I just learned a lot just by being there. Trying to be a sponge and pick things up. And I wasn't even anticipating being a GM someday. I was just worried about doing my job the best that I had. But everything I learned really comes from those guys.
And I remember hearing a story I think you told about one time. I think it was preseason. It was the first game, and it was maybe the Browns. And Peyton asked you for some intel on the Browns. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was. We were opening up with the Browns that year, and I was in pro scouting at that point. And one of my advanced scouting teams was the Browns. So when it's the first game of the year, you can't do a lot of work on what they did last year because there's so many changes in personnel. So, if you have that opening game, you can do a little bit of the first half of the first preseason game, maybe the second or third preseason game, but there's not a lot to do yet. But you do like to see them play a little bit in the preseason. Well, like first week of training camp, Peyton just grabbed me and asked me a specific question about their linebackers and what their drops were like. And I hadn't started them yet, because they hadn't played yet. And so I went back to my room and started looking at last year's stuff and to have an answer for him. The next day I grabbed him and I said, hey, look, I got the answer. And he's like, I already got it. Thanks. And he walked away. So that kind of showed me, one, like what his preparation skills are. They're second to none. But with him, like, you always got to have an answer and be ready to have an answer at a moment's notice. So, but I just thought that was just really cool. It just shows the level he took it to be as good as he was. And I can see he asked me other questions over the years, and I always had an answer moving forward after that.
Tom, can I just ask you a question regarding this offseason and in particular how you've been very active in terms of recruiting players to your defense? Obviously, there was the big name signing in free agency from the Patriots. Jackson last week, obviously, you took a safety in the draft. You've had the Mac trade. Was that with a view to how the defense played last year, or more so around the fact that the division has gotten even busier in terms of Russell Wilson coming in and 3 quality quarterbacks with great offenses in the division?
Yeah, well, as we finished last season and moved into this season, I knew last year, a brand new coaching staff, new head coach, obviously, but really, new schemes on both sides of the ball. And certainly on defense, when you do change the scheme, that means that, there may be some players you have that are really good players and might not quite fit exactly what you're looking for. But last year, you can't flip the whole roster, and you wouldn't want to either. I mean, some players you have to try and make them fit in certain situations. But certainly on defense, we had to really turn it over a little bit. Certainly on the defensive line, there were just some characteristics that we do now that's just different than we did in Gus Bradley's defense. And I've seen this before. Like when I was with the Colts early on, when we first arrived there, Jim Moore was the head coach. Vic Fangio was the defensive coordinator. We ran a certain type of defense there. And then when Tony Dungy came in as the head coach, and I believe at that point the coordinator was, I think it was Ron Marlis, but I may be wrong. But in any event, everyone knows what the defense that Tony Dungy runs, and it's a lot different than what Vic Fangio runs. So we had to change the whole thing. And it took a couple of years to get the personnel changed over for that, just because Tony ran it a lot different than Vic did. So it's the same thing here. But it also lined up in free agency where there were some players that we thought could help us, because sometimes you have to turn it over, but then you go look who's available, and we're like, boy, there's just not a lot available this year. It's just the way it works sometimes. Or you may not have the cap space to do it. Well, luckily we did. We did have a lot of cap space. So that lined up with the fact that there were some players out there, Khalil Mack, JC Jackson, Austin Johnson, Sebastian Joseph Day. Those guys can come in and we think can really fit this really well.
It's hard to believe as well, Tom. We're literally over a week out from the NFL draft. It feels like it was on 5 minutes ago now. What were your thoughts on how the draft went particularly in this first round when we had wide receivers going like sweets up until your pick? At 17, there were so many permutations that you could have went with, and you went for a guy in Zion Johnson. Did you expect Johnson to be there at 17 at the time, or were you surprised he was there?
I expected him to be there. I mean, the couple weeks leading up to the draft, and I think every GM does this, but you do a lot of work trying to forecast what's going to happen in front of you and what's going to happen a little bit behind you in case you want to trade back. So, I mean, we do a lot of work in forecasting and mock drafts just like everybody else does, trying to figure it out. And for me, it doesn't always necessarily mean where a player, which team he's going to go to, but just, is he going to go before us or not? So we're prepared. In this case, with all the work I did, I felt pretty confident he would be there. But when the Texans took Kenyon Green at that spot, that's when I started to get a little nervous, because I thought Kenyon Green would go after us, and he didn't. And I also thought with Houston, I knew they had a need there, but I thought they were going to go a different direction, but they didn't. So when we got to our pick, I mean, I did have some thoughts of possibly trading back a little bit. But when Kenyon Green went off, and there was a couple teams, a couple picks after us that I knew had an offensive line need. Now, I don't necessarily know if they even liked our guy or if they would take that position. You don't know. You just kind of make educated guesses. But in the end, decided to stay put, take the guy that we like, and I move on from there. But the other interesting thing was, like you guys saw, no quarterbacks win. Those are usually pretty easy to fill in. But But in all the work we did all the work thinking, all right, let's do it pretending no quarterbacks go in the top in front of us. And if a couple go, great, that would help us out. But if they don't, we'll be prepared for that.
Tom, some teams like my own Broncos struggle when drafting quarterbacks. We acquire them in other ways, but the Chargers have an amazing history, right? Fouts, Breeze, Rivers, and then obviously now Justin Herbert, who you were selecting. I think would be really interesting for fans here and probably everywhere would be kind of to get some insights into the evaluation process. I know with Herbert, the Senior Bowl played a role, and we've been very lucky. We can call Jim Nagy a friend of the show. He's been on with us 3 or 4 times, and he talks about the Senior Bowl and the exposure that teams get to guys down there. But can you talk to us, I suppose, about what, as a GM, and you obviously have your scouting experience, what are the traits you look for? What's the evaluation process when you know that you're going to be taking a QB and it's going to be somebody pretty high up in the way in which you took Justin?
Yeah, the first thing, and I've been lucky. I mean, most of my career, it's been, it was Peyton Manning my whole career in Indianapolis and Andrew Luck for 1 year. So, I mean, those are pretty high level quarterbacks, obviously. And then I come to the San Diego Chargers at the time, and Philip Rivers is here. So I've been really, really lucky. But you have to realize when you're scouting these college quarterbacks, they're not all going to be perfect. And, when you're around guys like that, you just, as you're scouting a college quarterback, you want them to have all those qualities that those guys have. But, that's hard to find. And don't forget, those guys, when they were college players coming out in the draft, I mean, they weren't perfect either. Like, there's just no perfect players. It's not like this is a video game. So when we would go into this, and we did this when Philip was here, because we knew at some point, Philip wasn't going to play forever. We wanted to have a seamless transition to whoever the next quarterback was. So we were perfectly willing to, at some point, to draft a quarterback high, and he just sits for as long as he has to sit and behind Philip. Just never really lined up with the quarterback that we really felt good about, and Philip was playing at such a high level. So, but when we're looking at these quarterbacks, you look at the pluses and the minuses. You hope the pluses outweigh the minuses, and you hope some of those minuses you can work on. So, but I know in Justin's case, one of the things we really wanted to make sure is whatever quarterback our next quarterback was, we want to make sure he has some mobility to his game. Didn't necessarily have to be like Lamar Jackson, because that's just really rare. But a guy that can move around, you can run a boot with them. A guy that if it's third and 10, there's nothing there, he can go pick up 10, 11, 12 yards on his own with his feet. And that's the way this game is right now. I mean, defenses are very complex. So to have a quarterback with a little more dual threat, we thought something we'd like to have. So, so Justin fit that criteria. Obviously, the intangible makeup part of it is probably bigger than the physical. You're the face of the franchise. You have to be a team leader. You have to be a great teammate. Everyone's going to look to you. You got to be able to handle the ups and downs as a leader of the team. And that is things you grow into, but you have to kind of see that at the college level. And Justin had that. And it helped that he was a 4-year starter in college. So he was pretty mature coming out. And then the physical ability of, accuracy, which a lot of that is decision making too. Someone who can process quickly, make quick decisions, and accurate with the football. And arm strength's important. It's not the number one criteria, but certainly important. And Justin has that. But it's the most difficult position to me in professional sports to play. There's so much that goes into it. There's so much riding on it. So, and they're hard to scout. They just are. We've been very lucky. And like you mentioned, the Senior Bowl, the great thing about the Senior Bowl, and Jim Nagy's done such a great job there, but it's a great environment to watch players compete because they're playing against other players who will be playing in the NFL. So even, in the SEC and the Pac-12, there's a lot of talented players in those conferences, but again, not every single one of those players will be playing in the NFL. They're just not. Most of those players will go on to work in other industries when they're done playing college football. But the Senior Bowl, it's good on good. And it's, multiple days we can watch a quarterback, throw. Now our scouts had watched Justin for a number of years. I was lucky enough, since we're on the West Coast, I saw him live at least twice, maybe 3 times. So I'd seen a lot of him already, but it still was a great spot to see him, interact with other players, see if those leadership characteristics are there that we saw at Oregon, and they were. He was voted captain of his team, the Senior Bowl, after just a couple of days. So that shows you the type of leadership capabilities he has. But that's a great event, and it's really good for all positions. But certainly with Justin, it was a big help too.
Tom, you've been quite consistent in taking running backs over the past few years in the draft, and yet last week in the 4th round, you took Isaiah Spiller, and there was a lot of, I suppose, scouts and mocks that felt that he would go late 2nd round. Were you taken back and surprised by the fact that he fell to the 4th round? And was that, I suppose, in your thought process in terms of being a complementary player to Austin Eckler, who had a really good season last year?
Yes. Yeah, it's hard to tell, especially at that position. There's a lot of running backs in the draft each year, it seems. There were a lot of good running backs this year. It's always hard to tell, like, who falls, who has great value. I mean, there's 32 teams in the league that the league spoke, and this is where the players went. But sometimes you just don't know. But in his case, I kind of thought in his case he may go a little bit higher than he did. But there was also like a pretty good running back group. But we think he fits us well. He's a pretty multi-dimensional back, and you see how we use Austin. Austin's not just a running back for us. He's, we can line him up at wide receiver, either outside or in the slot, and he can really operate very well in there. Isaiah, probably he's not that Austin like to put him out at receiver, but very good out of the backfield as far as running routes and catching the ball. So that's a big part of the offense. Obviously, pass protection is really huge for a running back. And, he's 6 foot, almost 220 pounds, and he'll continue to get better as a pass protector. But he's a nice all-around running back. And coming from the school that he played at and the competition he played at every week, and was very productive, I think he can give us a nice little mix in that running back room.
Absolutely. And Tom, another great Irish story might be in the offing for us over the next season. We potentially might have the first Irish NFL player in 37 years. The Saints signed a punter last week called Danny Whelan, but also woke up early on Sunday morning and seen the Los Angeles Chargers sign a kicker from Illinois who was born in Dublin called Danny McCourt. So it's good times for the Chargers. Potentially, it could be the first Irish player for the Chargers, my first Irish player in the NFL in 37 years.
No kidding. I didn't know. You'd think at the very least, with all the soccer background, that you would have a kicker or punter that would have made his way over by now. But maybe James would be the first. He had a really good career at Illinois. He's got a big leg, very big leg on field goals and kickoffs, really consistent kickoff leg. He had a really nice senior year this year as far as a field goal kicker. So he got a good look in camp. And the one thing we've seen with specialists, certainly punters and kickers, probably more so the long snappers, but definitely punters and kickers, they all kind of develop at a different rate and different time. I'm not a huge golfer, but it's kind of like a golf swing, trying to perfect that swing. So James would get a chance to come in here, compete, and kind of see where it goes. But so I think he moved to the States at age 8. So he's, true Irish heritage. His parents were born in Ireland, and they're Irish immigrants. So it's a pretty cool story.
And James McCourt, everyone, not Danny, my bad. Colin, go ahead.
I suppose kind of looking at the way in which the game has expanded, and obviously the Chargers have a big fan base here in Ireland, in the UK, in Europe, and I think you got to experience that firsthand when the Chargers played the Titans in Wembley in 2018. I think a narrow 1-point victory that day. But the I suppose the growth of the game here, and yesterday we saw the league announce 5 games, so it's growing. We now have the game in Germany. Is it something, drawing on the experience that you have had, that you'd like to see the Chargers get out and play an international game again in the not too distant future?
Yeah, from a football perspective, it is really difficult, especially on the West Coast, to make that trip. The time change, the jet lag, it's not easy. But I really enjoyed the atmosphere. I had a pretty long gap. Like when I was with the Colts, we played in a preseason game in Tokyo a while back. And then I had not been to an international game in a long time until that game in London. And to see the passion for NFL football there, it was incredible. I mean, it felt like a playoff atmosphere just for a regular season game. And we were out either Friday or Saturday night getting dinner somewhere, and they're just walking around. And a couple of people stopped me in this pub that I was just looking inside, wasn't drinking at all, but just looking inside the pub, to stop me and, said they were big Charger fans. And I mean, there's just the fact that someone would recognize a GM over in London, was pretty impressive. But the was a great atmosphere there. And then we played in Mexico City, after that, and that was the same way. I mean, we played Kansas City there, and just a great atmosphere in the stadiums. So, I enjoyed it. I think it's worth for your organization, for your club. I think it's worth it to do it, even though there is some downside on the football side of it, but there's things that we can work around. And it was also good for our team. When we went to London, we spent like 3 days practicing in Cleveland, which is on the East Coast. So we could gain 3 hours before we flew over. So it was kind of like a little bit of a team bonding event. They were all together for a week between Cleveland and then going over to London to play. And it was a great experience. Plus, we won the game, so it always feels better when you win the game or when you fly home. But I really enjoyed it. I'd have no problems going back.
Tom, it's been quite a hectic few years for the Chargers. Obviously, there was the speculation about moving from San Diego, which finally came to pass. And then there was the kind of holding period in the StubHub Center before he got to move to the new stadium. The pandemic is not too long after that. Are you finally finding your feet in terms of being in a fixed abode as the GM of an NFL team?
You know what? I really don't think about it, but when you put it that way, yeah, I mean, it did. Like, this was the first year in our new stadium with fans, and it was awesome. Like you said, it's been a little bit of a journey, the last 4 or 5 or 6 years. So yeah, you do feel like you're getting your footing a little bit. This year, with having fans for the first time in our new stadium since we moved, from the soccer stadium, and certainly since we moved from San Diego, I didn't even know what to expect, in our opening game. And the crowds were great. And to see this many people, wearing Charger jerseys, wearing Justin Herbert jerseys, it shows us that, we're building this the right way. And we knew it was going to take time. When you move into a new city and a new market, it wasn't going to happen overnight, and it still hasn't happened yet. We're still working on it. But, when you have a quarterback like Justin, and then when you have a head coach like Brandon Staley, and you see, how we play, like our style of play, I mean, it's exciting to say the least. We go for it a lot on fourth down. We throw the ball a lot. We get the ball up in the air. We like to score points, and we like to play an exciting brand of football. And that sells out here, and so do stars. And you can do both. You can win and make sure you have an exciting football team. So it's been great. I do feel like we're starting to get our footing, and it's going to keep getting better every year.
We were fortunate to have media passes to the Super Bowl in that stadium. It's a fantastic stadium.
Hey, are there stadiums in Ireland that are big enough to have NFL games?
Croke Park, 90,000, no, 85.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, so plenty big enough. Yep.
So if you want to come on over, we can maybe with U2 concert the night before, and then the Chargers. You know what?
You're too low on the totem pole with me, but maybe you should contact Commissioner Goodell and talk to Roger about it.
We're plugging away at that. That's how.
There you go. Good.
Here, let's do it. Stated against the Chargers in Croke Park. Try and manifest it. Tom, look, I think you're talking about Ireland there. The one thing we'll say, in people in Ireland, in the UK, and Europe, there's a lot of Chargers fans over here, and also thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of NFL fans in Europe. So we really appreciate you taking the time coming on the show. We welcome on any time, and hopefully we'll get over to LA at some point over the next year again, and relive SoFi again. Maybe at a Chargers game. Thanks so much for coming on.
No, thanks for having me on. This was really fun. And you guys asked some great questions too. But yeah, thanks for having me on. Thank you very much.
Season.